Tonight on The Late Debate, has the Prime Minister dug himself an even bigger hole as he allows Tory MPs to back an investigation into Partygate?
I have to say I'm sorry that for not obeying the letter and the spirit, and I think we have heard that the Prime Minister did know what the letter was, the Prime Minister now should be long gone.
Long waits for visas and a lack of support for hosts? Is Homes for Ukraine just a slogan?
The reality is that there isn't enough support for us and we're just on our own.
And grinding the capital to a halt once again, the environmental activists are back. Good evening. Boris Johnson finds himself in hot water again this week, apologising to Parliament for breaking lockdown rules, but claiming he did so unknowingly. Now, in a marked U-turn from yesterday, Tory MPs were allowed a free vote into whether he should be investigated for misleading Parliament, as even long-term loyalists called for him to go. The Prime Minister is in a deep hole, but instead of facing MPs, he was thousands of miles from London at a digger factory in India. Two other London MPs, who like Boris Johnson are also party leaders, made the case for a formal inquiry into whether he misled Parliament.
Because the Prime Minister has been accused of repeatedly, deliberately and routinely misleading this House over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. Now that's a serious allegation, because if it's true, it amounts to contempt of Parliament.
Conservative MPs are clearly too ashamed to back the Prime Minister, but still too complicit to sack him. The people each of us represent know the truth. They know the Prime Minister deliberately misled them and deliberately misled this House. It is an insult to their constituents, especially bereaved families in their seats.
The position taken by political rivals was no surprise. What was this intervention from the Brexiteer MP for High Wycombe.
I have to say I'm sorry that for not obeying the letter and the spirit, and I think we have heard that the Prime Minister did know what the letter was, the Prime Minister now should be long gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll certainly vote for this motion, but really the Prime Minister should just know the gig's up.
This Prime Minister is both capable of multiple law breaking but incapable of genuine contrition. And this attitude to the rules has marked his entire career, both in journalism and in this House.
Back in India, the Prime Minister had this response to proceedings in Parliament.
My job is to focus on the things that matter to the people of our country, and that's what I'm doing. I understand that a lot of people are hurt, angry, upset about what happened in Number 10. I've apologised and I continue to apologise.
Joining me now to debate all that is the Labour MP for Croydon Central and Shadow Minister for Policing, Sarah Jones. For the Conservatives, Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, the Minister for Building Safety at the Department for Levelling Up and also a Home Office Minister. And from the Green Party, the former Deputy Mayor of London, Baroness Jenny Jones. Stephen, is Steve Baker right? The gig's up?
No, I don't agree with Steve. This is very serious. We do have to take it seriously. We know the public have made great sacrifices during COVID. I lost my own mother. I wasn't able to be there when she died in the first wave. So, we understand the personal costs, but he has apologised. And I do think it's time to move on. We've got a humanitarian crisis. We've got a war that could easily spill beyond the borders of Ukraine. And I think that Boris Johnson is the right man to lead this country forward.
Well, given what happened to you with your mother, how angry were you when you heard what was going on in Downing Street?
The Prime Minister has apologised, and I think there's plenty of people that have broken the rules and not apologised. I think he's stepped forward and done that, and he's done that on multiple occasions. He's been open to scrutiny. We've had the Sue Gray report that he, in fact, commissioned that triggered the police investigation, and he was very keen that the police continue and conclude their investigation before further investigations get carried out. But now we've got this additional investigation. He's probably the most scrutinised Prime Minister we've ever had. Certainly in the last 100 years, given that level of that level of investigation.
Jenny, you knew him well as when you were at City Hall as a member of the London Assembly. The Tories were saying that those Tories like Steve Baker, who are not happy, were saying that he apologised very publicly in Parliament and then said something completely different to them in a private meeting. Is that the Boris Johnson you know?
Absolutely, yes. And it's quite interesting that the Conservatives are calling for him to go. I thought that perhaps Sarah and I would be the most radical ones on this, actually saying, you know, we have a criminal for a Prime Minister and that is absolutely inappropriate. But I just want to say, this is not about having a party. It's not about having cake and wine, perhaps even the wine, but it is about the cover-up and the lies and the deceit and the plain corruption that we've seen from Number 10. That's what people care about. It's not Number 10 having a party, it's that they've lied about it.
Sarah, is Labour playing politics here? After all, we're 2 weeks away from local elections. You're trying to destabilise the Conservatives.
Well, obviously, the Conservatives are keen that we move on from this issue, but it is so significant. The Prime Minister broke the law at a time when people were making massive sacrifices and going through real hardship. And what we saw last night, we saw a realisation amongst Conservative MPs that we were heading for an Owen Paterson moment where the Prime Minister was basically trying to whip his MPs to push this issue to the sidelines. And what we saw last night were some MPs, some Conservative MPs leaving, saying, I'm not going to vote tomorrow, whatever you make me do, and some Conservatives saying, well, I will vote, but I'll vote with the opposition parties. And the Chief Whip could see what was coming down the line, and they had to, at the last minute, make a decision to say, well, we'll have a free vote. So this has passed, and we've had William Ragg made a really important.
Stephen, is that right? Did the Prime Minister misjudge the mood and have to change his mind?
Well, no, I think Prime Minister's view hasn't changed, and that he thinks this is all about sequencing. We do need to conclude the police investigation. That hasn't concluded, and until that happens, you can't then have Sue Gray conclude and give her full report.
But that makes no sense. That makes no sense.
It makes perfect sense. You should always conclude an investigation before you put someone in the dock.
Well, firstly,
that's effectively what's happening.
He has already been fined, so there has already been a situation where he has been found by the police to have broken the law, and also our process, which the government, which nobody voted against in the end and is now happening, doesn't stop any other procedures going through. And the point that's been I felt so awful this week in terms of the Prime Minister's response is, you say he's apologised, but what's he actually apologised for? I asked him in the chamber whether he thought he had broke the law, and he won't answer that. And multiple ministers have been asked, did he break the law? And he won't answer it, because if he says yes, then he's definitely in more trouble. So he won't say yes. Exactly. It makes no sense. They're dancing around a pin of semantics when the Prime Minister broke the law, and he needs to accept the consequences.
You know his legendary Houdini skills for getting out of scrapes. Do you think he'll survive this one?
You know, he's an incredibly charming man, and he's very funny, he's very good company, and I can see why voters like him and why Conservatives like Stephen here are still loyal to him, but it is an illogical loyalty when somebody is so corrupt.
Stephen, can I ask you, and we've heard this, that ministers are getting very tired of having to defend him publicly?
Well, look, you're pointing at as though Jenny had a very close relationship. I worked for him as his deputy mayor for 4 years, very, very closely. I know, but he did not. He's not a party animal. He's someone that would have gone to an office do and wanted to raise morale. But for him, he takes his work incredibly seriously. The public persona, Sarah, is wrong. He works incredibly hard. Is very mission driven, and that's the Boris that I know, and that's the Boris that I support.
He is a liar.
No, he's not. He's made it very clear that the word that he's the one word that sums up. It's inadvertent. He did not know what that stage that was in any way breaking the code.
Sarah, can I just ask you? One of the things that has emerged from this is a spotlight on the Met Police. The Met Police have said that they will issue no more fixed penalty notices until after the local elections on May the 5th. Is that right?
Well, I mean, all through COVID, I was talking to the police all the time, and it was really difficult for them trying to implement COVID laws because they were very unusual, very extreme, very difficult for them. And now they're having to face a situation where our own Prime Minister has been found to have broken those rules. It's very difficult for them to navigate that path. So they need to do what they need to do. It's not my business to tell them how to do it. But we know that there are more parties that they haven't concluded their investigation for, and we know that we've still got the Sue Gray report to come. And a really important point, which Chris Bryant made in Parliament today, was, of course, we all support what the Prime Minister has said on Ukraine. We all believe that we need to do more on the cost of living. But if we are going to have a Prime Minister who might in the future have to stand up and say that we're asking our forces to go to do more in terms of what might happen in Ukraine and Russia, if we're asking the British people to do more and pay more in terms of the cost of living, you have to have a Prime Minister with integrity to be able to ask that of people.
Stephen, you in a previous guise, this is where you knew Boris Johnson first of all, were his Deputy Mayor for policing. The police have come under a lot of criticism, not just because of Partygate, but over a whole range of issues. Was the Sadiq Khan right to see off the Commissioner?
Well, my concern is not so much whether he was right or wrong, but the process. That's something that I think Sir Steve House said in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. The whole process doesn't seem to have been followed. You shouldn't ever throw someone under a bus like the way that the Mayor was attempting to do. I think that's entirely the wrong thing to do. What I would say is we've got a real problem. You know, when I was Deputy Mayor for Policing working for the then Mayor, confidence in the police was much higher. We had 2 in 3 Londoners believing police were doing a good job. It's now 1 in 2. So half of Londoners don't think the police are doing a good job. Confidence is at an all-time low. Pre the pandemic, we saw a massive surge in violent crime and acquisitive crime, burglary up 40%, knife crime up 60%, and even now knife crime is at a higher level than it was when I left office in City Hall. So there's a lot of issues there, high burgeoning crime and low confidence,
Jenny,
and the Mayor has to be held to account for that.
Jenny's a former member of the Metropolitan Police Authority when it existed. What
Yes.
do you think the priority of the next Commissioner should be?
Oh, I mean, definitely to restore public confidence, and they will do that by actually rooting out the misogyny, the sexism, the racism, and actually treating people as, you know, as
Is it more important than
resource.
tackling knife crime?
But that's part of it, because if you get public confidence, then they will start reporting things.
You've got to do both.
But back to this sacking of the Met Commissioner or that particular move, it's exactly what Boris Johnson did to the previous Met Commissioner, Ian Blair. That's exactly the same thing. So if we're worried about process, you have to go back to that as well.
OK. Now, when the Homes for Ukraine scheme opened just over a month ago, more than 100,000 people offered their homes within 24 hours. The generosity of the public is not in doubt, but the practicalities of the scheme are more complicated, which means so far fewer than 22,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived in the UK.
We've got a new bed for the refugee and we've got a wardrobe so far.
At their flat in Battersea, Emily and her partner are ready to welcome a Ukrainian refugee. But getting a visa for a woman they met on Facebook has been prolonged and tricky.
I had to use Google Translate to ask her lots of difficult personal questions about her marital status, about her previous homes, about her occupation, if she had any terrorist links, lots of really personal stuff.
Emily, like tens of thousands of Londoners, was desperate to help after seeing pictures of Ukrainians forced to flee their homes fearing for their lives. But after submitting the visa application, they heard nothing for weeks.
We couldn't speak to anyone to see where she was in the queue. There was no online tracker. The application went into a void and we just had to wait. It was really difficult. She's waiting on us for her life to restart, basically, and that's a lot of responsibility.
The Homes for Ukraine scheme set up by the government was meant to be a fast-track way of giving sanctuary to desperate refugees, but frustrating delays have become all too familiar to London MPs.
The scheme is not fit for purpose because I know that many people are contacting me on a daily basis who've been waiting weeks for the people they're sponsoring to be processed by the Home Office.
People in Hornsey and Wood Green have been saying, we've got a spare room, we want to help. But unfortunately, the government scheme doesn't seem to match that ambition.
The Department for Levelling Up said more than 56,000 visas have been granted under Homes for Ukraine. In a statement, a spokesperson said, "We have published guidance to help sponsors welcome Ukrainians into their homes, and everyone arriving in the UK through the government's Ukraine schemes will have access to healthcare, education, benefits and job support on the same footing as UK nationals."
We don't know if it's going to work because this is the first time that the UK has tried this, and we are not sure if people are aware of the commitments, the responsibilities of hosting.
Emily is worried about what happens next.
There's a lot more hoops that we need to jump through now, so getting her set up with benefits, with the doctors, with the dentists. Apart from through various charities and the Facebook groups, we haven't been supported by the infrastructure that should be there.
It's taken almost a month for Emily's refugee to be given a visa, but she should soon be in her new home. Stephen, you're a minister in the Home Office and Levelling Up, two of the departments closely involved in this. Things aren't going as smoothly as people would like, are they?
Well, that's it's true that it's a scheme where we've had to bring in a new minister in Richard Harrington, with experience from the Syrian refugee scheme. He's come in, and at the time he was appointed minister, only a handful of visas were being processed. It's now thousands a day. And it's fair to say that my figures are 78,000 visas now have been issued under both the family scheme as well as the Homes for Ukraine scheme. What we're seeing is certainly an improvement with 500 caseworkers involved. So I think the process is getting better, and it shows the generosity of the British people, and the processes and technology have caught up markedly. So, sure, there needs to be improvement, but I think progress has been made.
Jenny, one of the things that we are doing is providing a lot of military aid to Ukraine. Which do you think is the priority, sorting out the visas or giving the Ukrainians guns?
I'm afraid you've always got to have lots of different priorities, and I wouldn't choose between them. But quite honestly, I want to give the government a bit of credit for this scheme, because I think actually it's a very good idea, and it demonstrates the sort of goodwill that the British people do offer to
It has shown a nice side to people, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, and completely out of step with the government, of course. But the big problem is, if you do this, it opens up all sorts of extra homes that wouldn't there wouldn't be access to, Airbnb and things like that. But you have to give people the support systems. But you also have to have safe legal routes for refugees as well, and the government is not supplying those. But
that's important, isn't it, Sarah? I mean, it's all very well getting people here quickly, but you've got to have safeguards in place.
Well, absolutely, and I think with what's happened with Ukraine, it reminds me of what happened in Afghanistan, where the government should have seen coming what was coming down the road and been planning before we reached the crisis point. Suddenly there's a crisis point. Then there's chaos, there's MPs desperately trying to help their constituents do what they need to do, and the admin and the systems in the Home Office just aren't there, and that's what's happened here. We suggested there should be an emergency visa scheme where basically the security checks are done on people, but you rip out some of the administrative burdens so you can deal with people faster, and I think that's really important.
Do you give the government some credit for having the scheme?
We think the scheme is, the scheme, as you say, shows people's generosity, and we know how brave the Ukrainian people have been. We know how generous people are in this country. It's a shame that the government's systems haven't been good enough to give people what they need in this situation. And when you put that alongside what's happened with Afghanistan, you would think we would learn lessons in the Home Office and be able to deal with some of these things in a better way.
Are you happy it's in safe hands with Richard Harrington?
Well, I think Lord Harrington has got the experience and is doing a great job. He's making an impact, as I pointed out. But I have to say, one of the things that we should conclude is we are a very, very generous people. I'm a son of a refugee, and so it's great to see that over the last 3 years we've welcomed in safe legal routes 185,000 people. We've had Syria, we've had the Afghanistani crisis, and welcomed a lot of refugees. I'm the minister responsible for welcoming Hong Kongers. That's another group of people that are making their homes in this country. I think we're an incredibly welcoming nation.
Well, we're on the subject of refugees. Let's talk briefly about Rwanda. Unusual for a government to announce a big policy like this in the run-up to an election. Was that deliberate?
I'm not really involved with the specific timing of when we announce this, but I think it's a big, bold policy that's going to act as a deterrent. We've got a real issue with illegal, very dangerous crossings. It was only about 300, I think, a year, only 3 years ago. We're now talking about 18,000 illegal people crossing illegally in a year, and this is increasing year on year. We've got to do something about this, and this is obviously a big, bold policy that is going to act as a deterrent.
Bold policy, deterrent?
It's a stupid idea, absolutely stupid. It's inhumane, it's cruel, and it's going to be very, very expensive. It's going to cost us billions. It would be cheaper to give all of the refugees access to the UK, give them jobs, give them houses, and they would actually work and pay taxes. I don't understand how this government can come up with such a ridiculous scheme.
Sarah, something's got to be done. What would Labour do?
So firstly, this is meant to distract from
Yes.
the Prime Minister's wrongdoing. There's absolutely no question about that. Two things. Firstly, the way the Home Office runs, they are so slow with making decisions that it encourages people, I think, to come to this country who might not be genuine asylum seekers, because they know they'll be here for potentially years before the government makes a decision. And also,
we do not.
they know they need proper caseworkers in the Home Office to... We're spending £5 million a day on hotels because the government is so slow at dealing with cases, and we do not deport people. When Labour were last in power, about 14,000 people a year were kind of processed and deported. Now it's down to about 3,800. So the admin, I think, encourages people to come across in this route. But the other side of it is, where's the humane route for people to come in? And there has to be. The reason people are coming across in such a dangerous way is because there's no legal way for them to claim asylum. So we should have a legal route for people to claim
Sarah,
asylum.
Can I just stop you a second?
And then sort out the admin.
Running out of time. Finally and briefly, let's talk about the latest protests by Extinction Rebellion or the splinter group Just Stop Oil. Jenny, they've been quite small compared with previous ones. Has the steam gone out of this?
I don't think so. I think the government really ought to listen to them, because their demands are actually incredibly modest. What they're asking for is no new licences for fossil fuel extraction. I think that's so reasonable. You know, don't dig up in the North Sea and don't try fracking. Just stop and understand that there's a climate crisis and we have to go renewable.
Former Deputy Mayor for Policing, do you think the police need to move in quicker to stop these protests?
Well, absolutely. It's perfectly reasonable to raise an issue. It's unreasonable to do what these protesters are doing. And quite frankly, we back the police all the way. We need to ensure that that people do operate within the rule of law. And I'm very pleased that even councils are using their High Court injunction powers to remove protesters. You know, we have freedoms, but freedom to protest, sure, but it's within the rule of law.
Labour's taken quite a tough line on these, wanting injunctions against these latest protests. That seems not very green.
So there's a balance, and it's about protest and it's about the issue, and they're two separate things. I took for the Labour Party the police bill through Parliament, where we said the government have gone too far on protest. They're being too draconian. They're stopping even noisy protest and making that potentially illegal, which is ridiculous. But the right to protest is qualified. It's not. You can't be disrupting people to the extent that these people have been. So you have to separate the right to protest, and that is a qualified right, with the issue. And of course, we need to do more on climate change. We can all agree on that. But we cannot have a situation where people are stopping people going about their daily business and getting around. It's dangerous.
You'd agree with that, Stephen?
Well, I find myself in violent agreement on that. 1 point.
Jenny, very briefly, is there a danger that with the cost of living crisis, people are going to be more concerned about their bills than they are about the environment?
If they are concerned about their bills, particularly their energy bills, then they should be supporting those protests, because if the government actually focused more on creating a better market for renewables, which are cheaper than all these other options...
But that's a long-term solution. People's energy bills are going up now.
Yes, and what we could start doing is having all sorts of community efforts into local schemes. That could be done very quickly. We have all the materials. But just going back to this whole thing, wait until we have climate change refugees. There's going to be a lot.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We've run out of time, I'm afraid, so can I just say thank you to my guests, to Sarah, to Stephen and Jenny. I'll be back next month with another edition of The Late Debate, but until then, thank you for watching and have a very good night.